My name is Michael Kurinsky, and I'm a production designer at Sony Pictures Animation, and currently I've been the production designer on Hotel Transylvania 2. As a production designer, I'm responsible for overseeing just about everything visually in the film, and I feel like I make the film twice. I have to oversee it twice. First, on the visual development side, I come in, I read the script, and I'm usually the first artist on the show. And slowly, as I bring my team in, we start developing things that we need for this movie, meaning characters, environments, props, eventually color keys. So I oversee that with my 2D visual development artists, and then as that work is ready and done, we hand it off to ImageWorks, which is our production house, and I have to oversee that work being built and textured and lit to the specifications that the Viz Dev team helped me put together. So it's like seeing it built twice. The visual development team is the first stop where it comes to telling the story visually. So my job as the production designer, working with Gendy Tartakovsky, my director, is to be a good listener for him and listen to the intentions of what he's looking for as far as a character or an environment or a lighting scenario in the movie. And I bring that information back to my visual development team and make sure that we are supporting every story moment in the film. That's really important. And then it's just working with designers who usually work in black and white and do drawings and black and white value sketches, and those designs go to my more color-orientated visual development artists, and they'll paint those, add specific textures, and then that is handed over to ImageWorks, and all of this is pretty much done in Photoshop, is the tool that we use. When I first read the script for Hotel Transylvania 2, I started to break down in my head what types of artists I need, what types of designers would help me with this film. And one, I wanted to have designers that mimic the look of the first film and the design. So I looked at some of who were the designers who worked on the first movie and found artists that could draw in a very similar fashion. So I knew I was covered on the monster front. And then I also knew that the human world had a much bigger role in this movie, and I wanted to play the human world a lot more straightforward. So I found designers that were almost architecturally sound in their designs. They drew very straightforward. So I said, they're gonna be who I use for the human world. And then finding great colorists is a big thing, because color is a big part of this movie. So I needed to find people who I knew I could trust with helping me with the color script. And I also even had a person that is so good at doing graphic work that any graphic that you see on a billboard, on a cell phone or a computer, always went to the same person. So I had a team of experts in every discipline that I needed to help put this film up. Coming on as a production designer onto a movie that is a sequel, I was handed the keys to the castle, literally, and I've described it as like being handed this really great toy to play with. And it's like kids play with a toy differently than another kid. So I said, now that I have this toy, what do I want to do with it? But that said, I didn't want to break any of the rules that already were kind of set up in the first movie. I just wanted to find a way to put my own spin and my own touch on those rules. So it was things like, the monster world is a very colorful place, and I love working with color. So I said, is there ways that I can kind of take what's old and make it feel fresh and new, so that our audience will look at it and go, oh, I know this, but I don't think I've ever quite seen it that way before. That's exactly what I wanted to do, but I didn't want them to feel like it's a completely other universe from what was handed to me. So I was respectful to what was set up in the first movie, but just try to put my own spin on it. But then, because there were whole new areas and of undiscovered, let's say, parts of the Hotel Transylvania universe, like the human world, we saw a little bit of it in the first movie. We see a lot more of it in this movie. So that gave me an opportunity to go, what do I want, rub my hands together and say, what do I want to do with the human world in here? And really it was just making a contrast between what the monster world rules were and just playing the opposite of that. And so that gave me an opportunity to really create something of my own and kind of own it from the ground up. One of the places where I call what's old is new is when I read in the script that we were having a wedding in this hotel. I thought to myself, you know, every day people transform regular old hotels and ballrooms in hotels into this magical place for one night. Well, this is Dracula's hotel, and this is his only daughter that he obsesses over. Of course he's going to just deck out this place and make it feel completely special and magical for one night. So I became a wedding designer, a wedding planner, and I got to redesign the hotel and relight it and put different colors in it, play with different fabrics in the lobby. And then actually where we set the ceremony, we did an outside wedding. And again, feeling like a wedding planner, it was like, how can we take this space and make it magical? So what we ended up doing was we made these very spidery, gauzy type of draperies that are hung behind the chuppah where they're getting married. And they're hung up by bats that are always floating. And then behind them, we have all of our fireflies that are twinkling. So it's a very soft, translucent type of light that always has a bit of motion to it because it actually is from living things holding it or moving there. And it just gives it a magical, twinkly type of appearance there, something that I was really proud of. Another area that I got to do from the ground up using rules of the monster world was the camp that we saw that Drac took Dennis to. There was nothing like this in the first movie where when I talked with Gendy, I asked him, what are you looking for in this camp? And he was like, let's do something like Gothic meets log cabin. I was like, okay, what does that look like? But that's really what a production designer's job is to figure out what that looks like. So I did a bunch of drawings and tests of a main house because I figured if I start there, most camps have sort of a main house and then cabins and things that go around it. If I could get the look of the main house to look a certain way and he approved it, then everything would kind of follow suit from there. And it ended up being exactly that. It's sort of this Gothic roofed log cabin, and then we have these black cabins that all the, you know, they're very Gothic and painted black that all the vampires sleep in. And even, unfortunately, it got cut from the movie, but we had these great bunks for them to sleep in that were logs, but they were like coffins that opened up inside, and we had a whole sequence inside one of the cabins that got cut. But so we really took that idea of Gothic meets woodsy log cabin as far as we could and made a really special and unique environment for the film. So Dennis is such a special character that we've recently added to the Hotel Transylvania lineup of characters. And when we got the first drawings from our character designer, Craig Kelman, the first thing that was very obvious that he was trying to push forward with the look of this character was this enormous mop of hair, curly red hair on top of his head, kind of taking what Johnny has, Johnny's crazy hair, and putting it on steroids times 10. And so we fell in love with, just in the individual drawings, he suggested such life to this hair. So we could almost seeing it being like a secondary character with Dennis. It was going to move and all these things. But it was so enormous, and it was charming, and we fell in love with it until we built it. There's something to be said that happens with what you can cheat and get away with in a 2D drawing, and then when you actually build something in three-dimensional space and you turn it around and you look at it and you're like, oh my gosh, this just isn't going to work. And then when we put Dennis next to already established characters that we couldn't change their proportions because we know what they look like from the first movie, when we put Dennis next to, let's say, Drac, Dennis looked like a circus freak. His head was twice as big as Drac's. His hair was enormous. It was so big that Drac could never bring him in and hold him in like an intimate moment because his hair was so giant. So what we had to do was, this is where now it's up to me and then the other artists to capture the spirit of what we saw in those drawings and what we fell in love with in those drawings, but yet make it work in a three-dimensional space with something that we knew shot for shot that we weren't going to have a problem with, because that's what you really don't want to do. If you're fighting a character being in a shot in every scene and having to squeeze his hair down, that's a lot extra work. So what we ended up doing was, when we got the first model, it wasn't even finished looking hair. It was just sort of a big blob on his head that represented the shape of his hair. And we ended up just kind of whittling down that shape to something that we could all live with, and we knew that he would work with his character. Also, the other thing was the original hair size was so big, it was always putting a shadow on Dennis's face. And we're like, what are we going to do? Have an invisible light follow him around for the whole movie? So no. when we got that shape down to a thing that still captured the spirit and the fun of that hair, but was something we could work with, and we scaled this head down to match now this smaller hair size, everything fell into place and it worked. And I don't think we compromised really, because that hair still looks amazing in the movie, and it does kind of have a life of its own.